Alas adventures, we get to return to the world of Aora to have a deep discussion on the upcoming first-person action RPG Avowed, which is being developed by none other than Obsidian Entertainment. As of now, we should be expecting Avowed in fall of this year, 2024, and it will of course be releasing on PC and Xbox. Many of you are likely already aware that Obsidian released a deep dive video going over Avowed and showing us some gameplay last week, and although more on the positive side, I would say there was quite the divisive discussion going on with how people felt Avowed was looking up to this point. However, Obsidian would then participate in an Xbox podcast a few days after that, and they gave us not only more gameplay, but also a lot more information. Important information that, in my opinion, seems to have turned the tide more in their favor. We got a lot to go over today, chapter markers below. So you may have heard me mention the world of Aora in the introduction to this video. Aora is a fantasy setting that was first introduced to us gamers through Obsidian's Pillars of Eternity CRPG series. While Avowed is certainly not a CRPG, Obsidian has decided to keep the world of Aora alive, and Avowed will take place in the Living Lands, a large, diversely populated, meteorologically variable frontier island at the edge of the known world. Pillars 1 took place in the Adiran Empire, Pillars 2 in the Deadfire Archipelago, and now with Avowed, we're heading north to the Living Lands. But we're heading there as an agent of the Adiran Empire. We're not just a normie agent though, we're the personal agent of the Emperor himself, and you'll be on a mission deep into the heart of the lands to investigate and hopefully put a stop to the Dream Scourge, which is a mysterious spiritual plague. So moving into a somewhat divisive topic, and that is the art direction for Avowed, the art style. And Obsidian has seemed to go with this vibrant 3D, somewhat Pixar cartoonish style to the game. It's definitely not groundbreaking, nor is it really that impressive, but personally, I think it looks good. I care much more about vibing with the game's chosen art style over realism, I guess you could say. Now, of course, it's not a style that everyone will be excited for, especially after Avowed's initial reveal trailer back in 2019, which made it seem like Avowed was going to be a darker, grittier looking game. So I can understand some players that were hoping for more of that look. Now, the good thing about less realistic graphics is that it can make game performance much better if the developers take advantage of that. If you guys look at the crippling vines spell right here, there's nothing crazy visually going on here. The vines seem to be pretty plain looking, and the particle effects are nothing really crazy here. But the spell also looks really smooth and fun to use. It doesn't look like it's going to burn your PC in the process. Now, the voice acting, while certainly not BG3 quality...
You're right. Real battle isn't something you can prepare for, is it?
I kind of like it. I think it fits this style of game, which is clearly not as focused on cinematic storytelling. And then the dialogue facial animations are of course not the greatest that we've ever seen, let's be honest here. I understand the criticism, but for me this is not something of prime importance. I'm good with it the way that it is, as long as the dialogue and the story remain interesting and the gameplay is good. Now, the Living Lands will have plenty of different types of biomes for us players to explore. And it seems likely that we'll be starting the game in a coastal type of biome as we arrive to the Living Lands by ship from the Adiran Empire. Now, this area right here, we're told, is the third region of the game, and it goes by the name of Shatterscarp. And Shatterscarp is an arid, rocky biome, and many of the locals that have settled here come from the kingdom of Rawatai, a hardy, militaristic nation southeast of the Living Lands. The term open zone has been used to describe Avowed on several occasions now, and I think what that tells us is that unlocking new regions or zones is likely tied to story progression, and once you get access to a new region or zone, you'll likely have free roam access within that zone. But right off the get-go, when you arrive by ship at the Living Lands, you're not going to have access to the entirety of the Living Lands island. Each zone seems to serve the purpose of progressing your character further into the Living Lands to where you'll eventually find answers to the cause of this spiritual plague, which will likely lie at the heart of the island. If I could ask the developers one question regarding this open zone structure, it would be, will we be able to go back to previous zones? Or perhaps even more importantly, is there any practical use to going back to previous zones? Now, we did get further confirmation on the open zone nature of the game in the interview with Xbox. This particular area is just one small space in a corner of Shatterscarp. And joy to my ears, we were told that this area is missable. We also know that there's an archmage in another corner of Shatterscarp that has created her own little frozen labyrinth. Now, of course, I don't want players missing content, but this tells us that exploration will be rewarded, but even more importantly, that exploration is a core part of Avowed's design, or at least that's the way that they're making it sound. And as a player who rates exploration as a really important aspect of why I enjoy video games, I like to hear this, especially in an RPG. And then to further my excitement in this regards, in this particular area within Shatterscarp, which we already said is missable by players who don't explore that well, we then watch the player discover a rather secret entrance into this beautiful cove grotto-like area, and notice the verticality in the game too, which adds a lot to the immersiveness of the environment. Environmental aspects like this with real exploration are what I live for in games, so let's hope that exploration is fleshed out for all of the zones. I'm not expecting huge zones in this game, but as Larian Studios showed us, smaller areas can still certainly be packed with content and create a sense of wanderlust with players. Now, another area that Obsidian expanded upon was the importance of player agency and choice in their games. This could, of course, be PR talk, but Carrie Patel, Avowed's game director, seemed to place big emphasis on giving players real opportunities to define who they are in this world, how they want to behave, what challenges players want to undertake, and all of this ties into quests, companion relationships, and gameplay alike, and we're going to talk about all three of those subjects. Carrie says that they've created this player-shaped hole where players can define who they are in this setting. One of the biggest worries of the RPG community up to this point has been, how RPG will Avowed actually be? Is it going to be more so an action adventure that throws the RPG tag loosely on it, like many other games do? Or will it actually have like some real role-playing opportunities and mechanics? Since this is Obsidian Entertainment, a company familiar with real RPGs, I'm going to stay optimistic, but I'm also going to remain cautious, not let my hype get out of hand when regarding this particular topic of RPG and RPG mechanics. With that said, the most important thing at the end of the day is that the game is fun. And this moves us into the topic of gameplay and combat. Obviously, this game has taken on the first-person approach, which can work really well for exploration in video games. The first-person perspective, when done well, in my opinion, does allow for a level of immersion that third-person perspectives just simply cannot achieve. When it comes to combat, though, first-person combat, specifically melee combat, can be a tough one to tackle. With that said, I think Avowed's combat actually looks pretty damn fun. I know it's not a style of combat for everyone, but this is definitely a huge step up from what many of us are used to with games like Skyrim, even though Skyrim is one of my faves. One of the more common criticisms that I have noticed, though, is that melee combat might need a little more impact behind a few of the attacks, but overall, it doesn't look too bad in that department. The combat seems like it's pretty fast. There's plenty of different types of weapons. There's light and heavy attacks. You can dodge out of the way. You can block attacks, as we see this player right here holding up their shield as an opponent fires an arrow at them. And there's also a parry mechanic. This little white circle right here seems to be the visual indicator for when you have the opportunity to parry, which will then stagger an opponent. It'll block the attack and stagger. And to my surprise, the window of opportunity for the parry does look fairly small, as it should be for a skill-based, powerful mechanic like this. There also appears to be power attacks that opponents use, which are represented by a red circle, which probably indicates that an attack cannot be blocked or parried. A big thing that Obsidian has been pushing here is that we players will be able to use a wide variety of different weapons and combinations, some of which may prove to be more useful against certain types of opponents than others. We've seen sword and board, axes, guns, wands, spells coming from players' hands, bows, and more. And Obsidian is using this dual wielding system where you can actually mix and match many of the weapons in the game. We're told that you can have two loadouts of which you can customize your primary and offhand weapon usage. So it's up to you if you want to dual wield wands or dual wield guns, or maybe use a wand and then a one-handed sword, and so on. We haven't seen much in terms of two-handed weapons up to this point, except this axe. Let's hope that there's more. We also know that some weapons will be able to be enchanted. As you can see right here, the player is dual wielding wands, but the wand in their left hand has some sort of ice enchantment on it, which can cause opponents to ultimately freeze. And of course, we have an array of cool spells that don't appear to be dependent on a particular weapon, as many of them are cast with hand gestures, such as this spell that pulls opponents towards the player. Then we have the Tanglefoot spell, which roots opponents in place. This cool glyph-looking spell that seems to interact with the player's wand quite well. I wonder if it also interacts with like a sword. We were also told that there's going to be some cool spell combinations that we can do, such as creating an AoE fire area on the ground and then pulling opponents into it, or freezing opponents and shattering them with a sword. Elemental enchantments and spells will also have some utility use in this game, such as some spells and elements being able to aid in breaking barriers. And we're even given the idea that we can freeze water to help us navigate terrain better to reach places that otherwise would have been very difficult to reach. Now, Obsidian's first deep dive video left us with a very important question of, will there be classes and skill trees in this game? They're really making it seem like you could just pick up any weapon that you want and like mix and match them and just be a god with all of them, which was a bit worrying for RPG fans, because if it was like that, that's really streamlined, and that's kind of an important aspect of RPGs that many of us look forward to. But with Obsidian's interview with Xbox, we got some more information on this. Obsidian thankfully revealed to us that although the system is very flexible and it supports players mixing and matching various weapon types, there will be ability or skill trees. I've heard both terms kind of being used. That's really big info that they left out of that first video, and it was one of my primary concerns. Now, there's not going to be any true class system, though, like we had in the Pillars of Eternity series. I know that's going to be a letdown for many players, but at least we now know that there's some form of progression system where we have to make choices as to how we want to develop our character from a combat perspective. Obsidian did say that you can choose to commit to being like a pure fighter type character, but it's not enforced as a class setup. It's going to be completely viable to mix and match between different abilities on the tree or trees. And it's also important to note that we were told that respecking will be pretty easy to do in this game. So players who want to try something different, there's not going to be too much holding you back from doing that. How much depth this ability tree or trees will have, how many branching paths there are, how important are the decisions that you make, how influential are they on the actual gameplay element, we're gonna have to wait to find out. Personally, I'm erring on the side of this being a fairly simplistic system. Otherwise, Obsidian probably would have expanded more on this, but who knows? We still have a while until the game comes out. But I'm thinking Skyrim, but more flexible and possibly even simpler. At the end of the day, though, whatever system they use here, as long as it turns out to be fun and it complements the game that they're trying to create, then I'm all for it. Even though personally, I tend to prefer, classes and way more in-depth skill trees. At least we have confirmation on some sort of ability tree now. Now let's move on to the topic of companions, of which we've gotten to meet an Amua named Kai a few times now. We're told that companions will not only have story roles, but also combat roles, and that Kai specifically fits nicely into the tank role, as he has a taunt ability that will cause enemies to focus on him. But there's also the companion named Giada, who you can see right here in this clip, and she's said to have some nice healing abilities. There will be a few more companions outside of just these two, though, but apparently you can only adventure with 2 at a time, while the others will wait at a party camp of sorts. A lot of this information is coming from a different interview that Obsidian did with PC Gamer. All the companions do play roles in the game's story. They also each have their own personal story arcs. Now, you can't pick and choose what companions that you want to be a part of your overall game, I guess I could say, though, as they will all be recruited into your party, but you will have some agency at different parts of the game as to who you want adventuring with you at a given time. There will also be a few parts that specify a particular companion, as they may have strong ties to particular areas or quests in the game. There's not going to be an official approval system, but our conversations are said to be able to influence our companions' decisions and stories, so some permutations in this area, which is good to hear. I would not be expecting to control ability trees for companions, though. It sounds like they're set in stone in this regards, but I could be wrong. But Obsidian did say that we can kind of order companions to do some abilities in combat, but also outside of combat for environmental interactions. Now, how this order system will work, we're not exactly sure yet, but we know for a fact that it won't be a micromanagement system like something you may see in a game like Baldur's Gate 3. And the last topic of discussion today is quests and story. Now, we don't know much about the main quest apart from us being avowed to the Emperor and being sent to the Living Lands to investigate this spiritual plague. I've heard nothing on multiple endings yet, but I have heard the term branching dialogues being used quite a bit, though, but not specifically with the main story. But it does seem like at least along the way we'll be able to affect the world around us with quests, depending on the decisions that we make. Like in the Pillars of Eternity series, it sounds like we'll be able to have some agency in what factions we want to aid or not aid. In this particular side quest right here, the player comes across some fallen soldiers, and after investigating and talking to some of the survivors, the player ultimately makes the decision on who they think is at fault here, which is said to be able to result in things such as NPCs attacking you after you put blame on them. These decisions that we make specifically with this quest, we're told, will have effects back at the town that we just came from, and we'll be able to see the consequences of our actions and the choices that we've made. A lot of these quest decisions are said to bring us into morally ambiguous areas to where there's not always a clear right or wrong. Now, to what extent Obsidian overall takes this world and quest reactivity, we will of course have to wait and see. Thank you all so much for watching. I look forward to seeing some of your thoughts below in the comment section, and I will continue to cover Avowed up to its release and beyond.